Hi and welcome. This is really exciting. This is one of my first videos looking at the serious applications and the humanities applications of technology, particularly virtual reality, and I'm really honoured to have Embodied Labs here today who are going to speak to me a little bit about their work, the things that they're doing and their vision, and probably talking also about the importance of humanities and non-technical skills training in the clinical environment.
Here, put on this headset. We're gonna start this experience and you're gonna become Alfred for the next 7 minutes.
What does the patient perspective bring?
Yeah, when I was a caregiver, I would always be trying to understand my mom's, what was happening with her brain and how it was changing. And so I would go online and I type, questions like, why is she feeling anxious in her home? Or, who else has experiences with their loved one going through these hard to understand things. And I was like, well, why do we have to read through bullet lists of facts by the Alzheimer's Association about this? Why aren't there ways that we could actually visualize this and communicate it in a much quicker, more realistic, meaningful way? Just previous to this chat, I've experienced it now. Really powerful. Really, it just causes mass sort of reflection. Is that one of the outputs you're hoping for? Reflective learning? Is that what it's all about? Yeah, definitely. I think it's less about just that it uses virtual reality and more about where that experience sits and where the learners are coming in with what they know before they go through a virtual reality experience that shows the perspective of someone else. But then what happens once they come out of it and how they can build new visual vocabularies, new skills for their care practice. I think that's all around reflection, but individually and with each other.
You're absolutely right. And one of the things I've found with using the platform and using the kind of the filmic interface is that it doesn't necessarily point fingers. You're not pointing fingers. You're not saying you need to feel like this. You need to be more like this. What points do you think within your kind of timeline of the experience are people most affected? We've
had a good amount of user testing. So we started out piloting it with medical educators, and the first thing that surprised us was how much, after they went through the experience, they said, oh, I felt frustrated, or I felt like I was being talked down to, or I didn't realize how a visual impairment could make me feel tired. But by having it, now I can have that insight. And then putting it more into a testing with students, just hearing medical students' insight of the scene with the cognitive test where they have this moment and say, wow, if I don't assess my patient's audio-visual function, I could actually misdiagnose them. And then to connect that with, that really happens in practice today.
Especially the last scene when people have gone through the whole experience, they've been adjusting the earphones and they've been, some people even sit like this and they'll just kind of, not even interact.
Are they kind of zoning out almost?
Almost kind of just staring straight ahead with their hands over their ears just so they can be able to hear. And that's, for some people, it's not necessarily the visual impairment that's frustrating for them, but it's the hearing impairment. Yeah. And so when they're given a hearing aid by the doctor, that's the moment where they kind of sit back and say, oh, haha, and they laugh and they can finally feel comfortable, even though they still have that vision impairment.
But this kind of junction between technology and humanities, so the humanities are very ingrained in the human condition. I mean, we're using modern technology to get the message across. It's really exciting, isn't it, actually, combining these two worlds? Tell me a little bit more about that kind of journey for you guys. What theory are you bringing into play here and things like that? Yeah, I started out being really interested in the theory of embodied cognition, specifically in created virtual worlds, and also embodied learning. So, using your motor pathways to combine with whatever you're learning. And I looked at all the existing work and tried to figure out a way to say, we've already seen groups like Jeremy Bailenson at Stanford and his Virtual Human Interaction Lab, or the Institute for Creative Technology with their medical VR and avatars, that if you can self-associate yourself with an avatar that you're embodying, it can be a very powerful learning tool.
Yeah. So initially, Carrie and I working on the Alfred Lab, And so we created this space, first not in virtual reality. It was kind of like you would look at a screen and you would be experiencing macular degeneration, and you would be in a doctor's office and trying to take a cognitive test. And first of all, not having immersion in that space detracted a lot from the experience. So we then decided, let's definitely do this in virtual reality. So we put it into VR, we made it immersive. But there was still
It was
lacking.
kind of an accident, though. Like,
yeah.
Our teacher, we were in a class together. We met while we were still students, and he just happened to have that development kit, and so it's kind of an afterthought of like, oh, it's here. We spent some time doing it in the desktop environment, and then we came back to VR because we tried it, and we said this can't be done outside of VR. So we put it in VR, we liked it, but then it was kind of missing like this human aspect.
Yeah, no,
sure. So having like animated characters around you, I mean, it wasn't even to the uncanny valley. It wasn't even that good. It was just like, it was, your space might have been immersive, but who you are and who you were with wasn't. But I think what we were envisioning is, what else? There's so much more beyond just someone having a disease.
Mm-hmm.
It's more like, where did they come from? Who is their care team? And then this complex experience of how they perceive the world as they're trying to get treatment for their disease.
So you kind of suggesting that the whole patient landscape, and this is something that I study a lot, is that actually a patient who comes into the acute setting, they have a huge backstory. If you were to go into a waiting room now, guaranteed you'd have some of the most interesting narratives all in one space, and that patient backstory actually affects that whole journey. Not just the treatment and diagnosis, but actually the way we communicate, the way we talk, the way we're able to have that shared interest and that thing in common. So how important are the humanities, would you say, not just in your work, but certainly in healthcare, in actually being a good human being is part of the healing process in itself? I like how you're framing it as the humanities, because we've, as a team, been grappling a lot with what do we call this? I still struggle with that. Yeah. When I started out, it was how can I increase empathy using virtual reality? Mm-hmm. And the one thing that I kind of learned through that is actually empathy is a really complicated thing to try and grasp, and to what is empathy if we break it down. So I look at the humanities, and the humanities teaches us a lot about the human condition, the human desire, things like compassion, things like communication, the way we interact. Mm-hmm. And so I use the word humanities because I think that's really ingrained on the human condition far beyond and far longer than what technology has offered us so far. Mm-hmm. So that's a really great frame. I love hearing how you're describing it, and then we've done the same thing where we start out, we're like, well, we want people to understand each other better, and then what is this beyond empathy, or what is empathy? And people have asked, well, just because I'm empathizing, does that mean I'll actually do my job better, or be a better physician, or whatever kind of health provider? And so I think a lot about it as insight, of like being able to uncover the things that we don't know. Mm-hmm. And sometimes it's things that it's like one thing I discovered even just through the Alfred lab was the nurse who was speaking to the camera, she was just told to act like that was her grandfather, that the camera was her grandfather. But then when people were going through the experience, they said, oh, she was talking down to me, or she went and talked to the son instead of me, but when she was talking to me as Alfred, I didn't like her tone. And then I was like, man, I wonder, I became very aware of my tone with like my own grandparents, and said, what am I unaware of that I'm doing that's being perceived in these ways? But were you aware of, so you didn't have awareness of that until after you'd have that feedback, or after you'd seen that experience, is that right? So with my stuff, one of the things I noticed was the difference in language. So a couple of my experiences, you see the patient go through different environments. So you go from an ambulance to a resus bay, and then onto a kind of a theatre setting. And the language changes between the paramedic, who tend to be addressing me as mate, all right mate, cheers mate, sort of thing. And then you go into the theatre, and it's this kind of formal setting where the surgeon's calling you Mr. whatever. And you hadn't realised it until you watch it back, but actually it's not just the environment that's changing, but it's the whole way you're communicated with, it's the whole way you're interacted with, and that's a huge thing. But I don't know if I'd even have that insight if it wasn't for the filmic interface, if it wasn't for actually seeing it through the subjective camera, And that's powerful about all the stuff we look at, isn't it, really? That made me think about just, we talk a lot we are a team of 4 that made this, and when we look back at how the Alfred Lab came to be, and really just how we've been thinking about embodied labs,
it's through the eyes of a developer, a filmmaker, theater background storyteller, someone that's been in curriculum and ed tech, public health, education, and a lot of science, but then combined with that art to be a medical illustrator. And I think another reason, like when we built the Alfred story, it was a huge effort between me as someone trying to think about the end audience of a medical student and the accuracy of the disease presentation. Ryan, who's the storyteller, trying to think about how to lead the person through the story in a way that will direct their attention to the right places and help them take in that scientific accuracy and meaning. Absolutely. And then we had to work with experts, so the patients themselves and content experts, like a doctor who's a macular degeneration expert, to say, you know, what do you see in practice? Read this script and then give us feedback. And I think the humanities, it's like it takes an integration across all of the disciplines. Yes,
it is very much a transdisciplinary approach. And one of the interesting things that I pick up from what you were telling me is that actually these are all outside influences you're bringing into the clinical, the medical profession. And for me, that's very powerful, because I'm not, you know, I don't have a background in the kind of medical field myself, but I'd been a relative of somebody who had suffered. I'd been a patient myself. I'd seen the world through a lens, if you like, although that sounds cheesy, but as a cameraman, you see the world slightly differently, I think. And it's kind of like, these are really important skills, they're really important messages that actually, in healthcare, they're just as valid as anywhere else, aren't they? And you're proving that. Now, really quickly, Tom, just to talk about some of the kind of technical aspects of what you've done. What I love about watching that back is, so I work with 360 film, but then to have those other elements with the hands coming in and that kind of interactivity, I think that changes this idea of it being a passive experience. It's a beautiful combination of the both. Why did you go down that route of going down the filmic interface as well as kind of the software generated stuff as well?
Sure, yeah. So especially with VR right now, you kind of have two sides of a spectrum of having everything in 360 video, and then on the other side of the spectrum is all interactive, computer generated people that you're interacting with. So we really liked you know, having the human aspect of real people that you're interacting with. But we also really value agency, so being able to being an actor in your environment and having an identity, and not just being like a floating head. So like, let's make this a real environment, but also give people the freedom to interact and be able to, you know, see their hands and really be embodied. So it's kind of like a combination between cues of filmmaking and game design, so it kind of comes together beautifully in like this game engine type like workflow that you create this like middle environment.
And that's what I love the best about it, actually. Like you said, it's this combination of all these skills, all of these influences to create a really powerful experience. I absolutely loved it. So just to kind of wrap up, what's the vision, what's the dream, and where are you going with this?
Yeah. We've learned so much in the year and a half we've been working on this as a team, and then even more when we tried to get our company going and figure out a way to sustain this kind of mission and vision. So I think our big dream is that we can create a place for these kinds of content creations to live around soft skills training or humanities driven training. And then we can foster an ecosystem where we say, here's the content creators, here's all these medical professionals or caregivers, and then we can be a place for both of them to come in and contribute and access that, so that we can grow the ability for us to train through what we think is really just as important as any other kind of skills training. Yeah,
I'm totally behind that. I love that. It's a great way. Thanks for joining me on my first video, so I'm really honoured. So thank you very much indeed, and thanks ever so much for watching. We hope that was interesting. Bye for now.